India narrative. It has a huge India footprint. Whether you look at the Deccan high-level principles on food security, whether you look at the Chennai high-level principles for blue ocean economy, whether you look at the Goa roadmap for tourism, whether you look at the Gandhinagar implementation roadmap for land restoration or Jaipur call for enhanced MSMEs, all this will leave a huge footprint of India in G20. So one of the key achievements to my mind, one is that we've achieved a very major green development pact in today's world of climate action and climate finance. Every single country has come together to focus on green development pact, which has financing, which has focused on global greenhouse gas emission by 43% by 2030, which has a doubling provision of adaptive finance by 2025, which has a global biofuel alliance, which has completely new principles of life for sustainable development, which has ending plastic pollution, which has reducing disaster risk, and a whole lot of other components put together as the Green Development Pact of the leaders of G20 countries for a greener world of tomorrow. Secondly, there is a huge focus on accelerating progress on sustainable development goals because the COVID had hit a vast segment of our population. There's a G20 action plan to accelerate progress on SDGs. There is a huge focus on education, health, nutrition. There's a huge focus on creative industries like culture as a transformation for SDGs. And there is a huge focus on inclusive and resilient growth in this entire things, most of which the finance minister has spoken about, so I'm not talking. But I think one of the biggest achievements of this New Delhi Leaders Declaration is what we've achieved on women-led development with a massive focus on women empowerment and gender equality. And this focuses on reducing labor force participation gap, bridging the gender digital divide. There's a huge focus on gender inclusive climate action. There's a completely big focus on women's food security, nutrition and well-being. And we've created a new working group on empowerment of women, which Brazil will carry forward. There's the next key in the world. The G20 leaders are focused on artificial intelligence. They are focused on cyber security. Also, I would say that one of the key aspects of this presidency has been its focus on developing and emerging markets. No document of G20 has had such an immense focus on developing and emerging markets and the voice of the global south as this particular document has. This is a document of the global south. This is a document of the developing countries which came together and spelled out their priorities. And India has been the spokesperson of all the global south and spelled out their priorities in this document. This document also condemns terrorism. It denies terrorist groups safe haven and freedom of operation and many other things. But let me assure you that for the planet, there are several new initiatives on climate and health, and this has been an inclusive G20. This has been a very a G20 where the leaders give a direction to global agendas, and this has laid the foundation for very bold action. But more than anything else, it has amplified the voice of global south. It has also demonstrated that India has a huge capacity of bringing the world together and leading the world in developmental and geopolitical issues as well. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Amitabh. Following up on my colleagues, let me add a few more remarks. While noting that the G20 is not the platform to resolve geopolitical and security issues, the leaders recognized that they can have significant consequences for the global economy. In particular, they dwelt on the ongoing war in Ukraine and the impact it has had, especially on developing and least developing nations still recovering from the pandemic and economic disruption. The three F's, food, fuel, and fertilizers, were issues of special concern. Another subject that was addressed by them, as the Sherpa noted, was countering terrorism and money laundering. The leaders condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and recognized that it constitutes one of the more serious threats to international peace and security. So, in conclusion, as you can all see, all G20 member states have come to New Delhi with a strong sense of responsibility about addressing the most pressing global challenges. Speaking for India, we are clear that no one left behind, as the finance minister highlighted, no one left behind is as much a foreign policy goal as it is a domestic one. Indeed, it should be a global one. Obviously, there are differing viewpoints and interests at play in regard to the various issues under discussion. However, we have been able to find common ground on all of them. As a result, we can justifiably state that under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's guidance, the New Delhi summit has given clear directions for the growth and development of the global economy in the years ahead. We would be glad to respond to your queries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I open the floor for questions, let me just mention that the document in question, the New Delhi Declaration, has been uploaded on the website about an hour ago, and please have a look at it. Let me open now the floor. I see gentlemen at the back. Yeah, right there at the back on the left. Yeah. Parikshit, right? Yeah, please. No, not there. Behind you.
One question to...
Please introduce yourself and the organization.
I'm Parikshit Luthra from CNBC TV 18. My question to Minister Jaishankar and G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant and also Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. How difficult was it to have consensus on the wording of the Ukraine-Russia war? This has been a difficult point in every conversation in the G20. There were several drafts circulated. We heard of a new draft this morning as well. Were there any countries which actually helped India in bringing consensus on the table?
I see a name. I see the lady here. Please, ma'am. Yeah, you.
Ma'am, good afternoon. My name is Ruchi Bhatia from Bloomberg News. The Ukraine paragraphs also mention about the work that Turkey did with respect to getting some sort of a consensus on the issue of the Black Sea grain deal as well. Where are things with respect to that, and can we expect any movement on that critical issue anytime soon, because it does concern several nations across the globe? Thank you.
There's a hand there, the gentleman, yeah, right at the back on the left. Microphone, please. Yeah, it's working.
This is Manas Pratim Bhuyan from Press Trust of India, PTI. In one of the paragraphs referring to the Ukraine conflict, it is mentioned that there were different views and assessment of the situation. So, how do you explain this line about having differences on the Ukraine crisis? The question to Foreign Minister or the G20 Sherpa.
Gentleman here.
Hi, this is Ashish Singh from the Geostrata. Going forward, how will we see action for climate-related adaptation financing for the Global South, especially with India being part of the Troika? Thanks.
We'll take one last question there. Yeah, there. Yeah, the lady there. I'm sorry. Behind you, right at the back.
Okay. Hi, I'm Hamna from Brute. I wanted to know, does India see itself as the leader of the Global South, and how did it assume this role? Because there's been a lot of conversation about bringing the Global South together. So, yeah.
Sir, may I?
I didn't get the last one. The last question was India. How does India see itself as a leader of global
as
South?
the leader of the global
Oh,
South.
okay. Where is this lady? I'll just go with the stop, then I'll. Let me respond to some of the questions, and then I'd like request the Sherpa to come in on that after me. How difficult was it to forge consensus on the Ukraine issue? This, as we have pointed out, is a declaration of 83 paragraphs. It has a lot of content. There are a lot of subjects which have been covered, some of which we have spoken about. But obviously, because of the ongoing conflict, the strong views about it, considerable time was spent, especially in the last few days, in regard to geopolitical issues, which really centered around the war in Ukraine. The question who helped, eventually everybody helped because everybody came together for the consensus. But I think if Sherpa would bear me out, I think the emerging markets took a particular lead on this, and many of us have a strong history of working together. Bear in mind that actually you have 4 developing countries in succession as G20 presidency: Indonesia, us, Brazil, and South Africa. So, but I would say, rather than who helped, the point to be recognized is that a common landing point was ultimately fashioned out. On the Black Sea grain corridor, there are many discussions going on. As you know, the Foreign Minister of Russia is here. The President of Turkey and his delegation are here. UN Secretary General is here. Other people are here. So it's natural that there would be discussions going on this. In the past, I should add, when the grain corridor was created at Bali last year, we had also in our own way contributed to some bridging of viewpoints and concerns, both between at that time between Turkey and Russia, and also worked with the UN Secretary General. On the sentence, or that phrase about having different viewpoints and assessments, I think we are being transparent. It is a fact. This is today a very polarizing issue. There are multiple views on this. There are a spectrum of views on this. So I think, in all fairness, it was only right to record what was the reality in the meeting rooms, and I think that is the sense that is sought to be captured. And I will leave the climate action issue to Sherpa, and I don't know if Finance Minister would like to speak on it. But on the global South, look, it is not, what India has tried to do, beginning with our presidency, was to seek to ensure that the concerns of the global South constitute the core agenda of the G20 deliberations. Because after 3 years of pandemic, after economic disruptions of various kinds, after the impact of the Ukraine conflict, after climate events, the fact is that the countries of the global South are in deep economic distress. And that distress has not, in our view, been fully recognized till now. And we therefore very consciously started off with the Voice of the Global South Summit. But again, I emphasize, the voice was of the summit. It was the voice of 125 countries who participated in that summit. But we, as the G20 presidency, we saw it as our responsibility of distilling the views which were expressed in that summit and putting it before the rest of the G20. And we can take a lot of satisfaction that many of the issues that the finance minister highlighted, which the Sherpa highlighted, these are truly global south issues, and we hope that certainly the Delhi summit and the deliberations which will take place today and tomorrow would give strong guidance to take them forward. Sherpa, Amitabhji, if you want to add to it.
On the Russia-Ukraine crisis, India worked very closely with Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia. And I want to say that it was the emerging markets which played a very key role. India worked with all the emerging markets which played a very key role. There was very tough, very ruthless negotiations which went on for several days non-stop. And I really feel that in the end, the issue was clinched because of the leadership of the Prime Minister, because eventually we had to say that the leader wants it and this has to be delivered. And secondly, I really want to thank Mr. Jaishankar. I constantly took his advice and he guided me, and he gave me two really outstanding officers. One was Naidu, Nag Naidu, who's a very outstanding officer and very enthusiastic, motivated young officer who worked with me, Inam Gambhir. They did a really outstanding job as far as the geopolitical issues concerned. I had two other Foreign Service officers who've done brilliant work, Abhay Thakur and Ashish Sinha, on different aspects. But on geopolitics, they've done a really spectacular work. So it was really great teamwork. It was just brilliant teamwork by India, which has enabled us to achieve consensus on an issue on which the world has evaded any consensus. Even the Bali document which we talk about, actually we could not move forward with it because we could not arrive consensus in it for the first meeting. And on climate, let me tell you that this is one of the most ambitious document on climate, because it talks about almost 5.9. It moves first the language from billions to trillions, and secondly it talks about 5.9 trillion requirement for the presidency and for the G20 countries, and it lays a huge focus on life principles. It lays a huge focus on reforms of the multilateral institutions, because they were designed for the World War II and not for climate action. So all of these, it talks about new financing instruments, many other things, but in totality, if you look at it, it's probably the most vibrant, the most dynamic, and the most ambitious document on climate action that has come out anywhere.
Finance Minister.
Just to add one line on the climate finance matter, the question was raised whether mitigation is being dealt with or not. It deals with the mitigation, all right, but it also looks at adaptation and resilience. I think now the debate on climate finance is also moving much more into resilience, whether it is infrastructure or planning for it or funding. Resilience takes precedence. That is one. And second, country-specific solutions are now going to be possible. It's not going to be one size fits all. The problem of each country, particularly on climate, is so different from one another. So this Delhi declaration and also the discussions which were held during India presidency has focused on that. And thirdly, pricing and non-pricing tools are also now available for countries to adopt. It is not just going to be price it if it is carbon intensive and forget the others. Countries do demand pricing as one of the tools, but non-pricing solutions are also going to be a lot more friendlier to countries with different carbon emission levels. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open there's a lady here. Yeah, please. It's okay. No, ma'am, the microphone's already there. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am. You have the microphone.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening to the panel. This is Priyashmita. I'm from Informist Media. My question is directed to ma'am. That is, now that there is a global acceptance of the fact, or at least a G20 acceptance of the fact regarding food and energy security, what is the immediate ramification on inflation and growth forecast, both domestically and globally, that you see? Thank you.
Well, globally, I think it will have... Oh, sorry.
Ma'am, we can take questions together.
Okay.
Yeah, gentleman there. Yeah, you. The gentleman there who's put his hand up, if you could give the microphone to him. Yeah, thank you. No, not him, not him. I'll come to you, sir. I'll come to you in a minute. Person in front of you. Hold on there at the back. Yes, sir, you go ahead. You had the floor.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, not you, sir. Okay, since you have the microphone, go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to waste time. Go ahead.
Hi, Stephen Borwick of Nikkei Asia. My question is for Foreign Minister Jaishankar. Is today's achievement a step towards achieving what India has described as a world of greater multi-alignment, as opposed to the more old-fashioned sense of an international rules-based order? Thank you.
Yes, sir. You had the microphone. Go ahead. Is the microphone on?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted Minister Jaishankar.
Please introduce yourself.
Dr. Wail Awad from Sana, correspondent in India. Mr. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister, when you talked of the counter-terrorism measure, how serious was the members of the G20 and fighting terrorism together? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. You had a hand up quite some time. Yes, you right here, second row.
Samira Hussain with BBC News. I want to go back to Russia, and if you look at the language that was used in Bali, and you look at the language that was used now, gone is any reference to Russia and its aggression. Were those concessions made in order to get Russia to sign on? And do you think the weight of this has been watered down? And does that take away from its importance, especially when you're talking about fuel and food security?
Yes, you. Yeah. Right in front. No, ahead of him, please. I saw his hand. Yes, you. Please, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, sir, Rishikesh from the Press Trust of India. Everyone must surprised by this outcome. मेरा सवाल है कि पीएम मोदी का जो पर्सनल बॉन्डिंग है प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन एंड रशियन प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन के साथ, उसका कितना बड़ा योगदान था इस डिक्लेरेशन को ला पाने में, एंड व्हाट रोल हैज चाइना प्लेड इन ब्रिंगिंग दिस डिक्लेरेशन?
एक क्वेश्चन था कि दूसरा?
देखिए
will you take another one or just pass these on? One more. There was a gentleman there. Yeah, sitting there. Yeah, behind you. Yeah, Pranay, go ahead.
सर, प्रणय उपाध्याय हूँ जी न्यूज से। मेरा सवाल इस चीज को लेकर है कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन का जो G20 में इंक्लूजन हुआ है, ये अपने आप में काफी रिकॉर्ड टाइम में हुआ है। जून में प्रधानमंत्री ने सभी नेताओं को चिट्ठी लिखी थी और सितंबर में अब हम स्थिति में है कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन इसमें शामिल है। क्या कुछ इसके पीछे हुआ? इंडिया ने इसमें कितना इन्वेस्ट किया इसकी लॉबिंग के लिए या इस प्रयास के लिए? थोड़ा अगर आप इस बारे में साझा कर सकें।
Sir.
Maybe Finance Minister would like to...
On the inflation question, globally, of course, it's going to have an impact the moment it is executed. The understanding is executed and the grain movements start from Russia and from Ukraine. So, particularly countries which have been hard pressed, which have originally and for a very long time depended on grains coming from these two countries, are now waiting to have that back again. As a result, I think it will cool off inflation, particularly in food grains. Domestically, we've had very little grains coming in. Except for edible oil, particularly sunflower oil, our imports have not been so much dependent on these countries. There are times when we've brought in extra edible oil, and therefore to that extent, yes, it will certainly have an impact on domestic inflation as well. But largely, India's domestic inflation is affected by vagaries of the monsoon or supply side problems. Global impact is not as much as countries which are outside dependent on grains coming completely for their consumption from outside.
If I could respond to the question whether this is a world of monthly alignment. I mean, first of all, when we are talking about G20, let us remember that this is a forum for international economic cooperation. Its primary focus is on economic growth and development. And in a way, the G20 itself is a reflection of multipolarity. The fact that there was, in a way, the salience of G7 was a decade ago replaced by the salience of the G20. I think that itself was a statement. Now, what you see before you in terms of the leaders' declaration and the discussions that are going on are obviously discussions among a very broad, very diverse range of countries at different levels of economic development, whose economic and social, cultural composition is quite different from each other. So I think in that sense it's quite reasonable to assume that there is a certain there's a spectrum of views and interests out here which we have tried to harmonize to produce the declaration. The question on counter-terrorism, what happens? I would draw your attention to paragraphs 74 and 75 of the leaders' declaration. 75 speaks about the role of the FATF because clearly the financing of terrorism is a very strong concern which the entire international community, not just the G20, shares. The 74 deals with illicit trafficking and diversion of small arms and light weapons. So I think these are concerns. So within the G20, I think these conversations are quite helpful, but obviously in terms of policy action, they will be carried into their particular mechanisms and forums which focus on the issue. With regard to the to the comparison with the Bali declaration, I would only say Bali was Bali and New Delhi is New Delhi. I mean, Bali was a year ago. The context, the situation was different. Many things have happened since then, and in fact, if you see in the geopolitical segment of the leaders' declaration, there are in totality 8 paragraphs, 7 of which actually focus on the Ukraine issue, and many of them highlight problems which are of great contemporary significance. I mean, including the efforts of the Istanbul agreements, the concerns about unimpeded deliveries of grain, foodstuff, and fertilizers, the issues of attacks on the relevant infrastructure. So I think it's, one should not have a theological view of this. I think the New Delhi Declaration responds to the situation and concerns as it is today, just as the Bali Declaration did in a situation which was there a year ago. And finally, with regard to the आपका जो सवाल था कि PM's personal bonding, today, in fact, not just today, yesterday, and in some cases at the Jakarta East Asia Summit as well, where the Prime Minister was there. Prime Minister did speak to a number of his counterparts with regard to what was under discussion at this summit. So it is the responsibility of the Sherpa and of the ministers to put together the multiple strands and harmonize it into a